The temple stood on a hill of stone, old and silent, its walls covered with carvings of forgotten gods. The wind carried the sound of drums from the village below, a reminder that the season of offering had come again. Every year the people gathered here to give something precious to the gods, believing it would protect them from storms, sickness, and famine. This year, the offering was not grain or animal. This year it was the girl. She sat on the cold floor of the inner chamber, her wrists bound by glowing crystal chains. The chains were not heavy, but they were alive with strange energy that pressed against her skin like fire. Her eyes were silver, calm yet unyielding, and they reflected the dim light of the torches. She had been called many names since birth: cursed child, untamable spirit, the silent one. The people feared her because she never obeyed, never spoke, and never showed fear. The priests moved around her in silence. They avoided her gaze as if looking into her eyes would draw misfortune upon them. They whispered prayers under their breath while tightening the chains, though she had never struggled against them. She sat still, her back straight, her expression calm. Her silence was not weakness. It was defiance, though the villagers never understood. Outside the temple, the village prepared for the grand night. Fires were lit in the square, children sang old chants, and the elders spoke of how the gods would be pleased once the sacrifice was complete. The story of the cursed girl had spread beyond the village, and some had traveled from distant lands just to witness her end. To them, she was not a child with thoughts and feelings. She was a symbol, a burden to be lifted. The girl's name was Nira, though few used it. Most simply called her the offering. Since birth she had been treated as something apart, a reminder of something the people wished to forget. She did not know kindness from the villagers. She knew only chains, silence, and the weight of eyes filled with fear. Yet in her heart she carried a strength no one could see. She dreamed of the forest beyond the mountains, of rivers where the water ran clear and free, of skies that stretched wider than the temple walls. The sun sank lower, painting the horizon in shades of red and gold. The drums grew louder, echoing against the stone walls. Nero lifted her head and listened. The sound was meant to frighten her, to remind her that her time was near. Instead, she let it wash over her like waves. She did not fear the end. What she feared was never knowing what lay beyond these walls. In the distance, beyond the hills, the sky split with a streak of light. The villagers gasped and pointed upward. A vessel of metal and fire crossed the heavens, descending toward the valley. Few among them had ever seen such a thing, and many believed it to be another sign from the gods. The priests frowned and murmured, unsure if this was blessing or curse. The vessel crashed into the forest not far from the village. Smoke rose into the evening air, and the drums fell silent as the people gathered to watch. From the wreck emerged a lone figure, walking slowly, covered in dust and ash. He was not of their world. His skin was pale, his clothes torn, and his eyes carried both exhaustion and determination. This man was Rin, a traveler from the stars. His ship had failed during his journey, forcing him down onto this strange world. He carried no weapon, only a pack on his back and the hope of finding aid. He stumbled into the edge of the village, and the people surrounded him with cautious stares. They had never seen a human before, yet they did not know what he was. To them, he was an outsider, a wanderer who had arrived at the hour of sacrifice. The elders debated his presence. Some claimed he was a messenger of the gods. Others feared he was an omen of ruin. Yet they allowed him to stay, at least until he could repair his vessel. Rin thanked them with simple words, though he sensed their distrust. As the villagers returned to their preparations, Rin's eyes wandered to the temple on the hill. He noticed the guards at its gate, the torches burning brighter than anywhere else, and the way the people lowered their voices when speaking of it. Curiosity stirred within him. That night, as he was given a place to rest near the square, he heard whispers of the offering. A cursed girl, chained in the temple, meant to be sacrificed before dawn. Rin did not understand their belief, but the thought troubled him. He had seen many cultures in his travels, some strange, some cruel, but the idea of giving up a life for unseen gods unsettled him. He asked why the girl must die, but the villagers only shook their heads and warned him not to question the law. While they spoke, Nira sat in her chamber, staring at the stone door that sealed her away from the world. She felt the change in the air, the arrival of someone unfamiliar. Her silver eyes softened for the first time in many years. She did not know who had come or why, but in her heart she sensed that the path of her life was about to change. The night deepened. The fires burned high, and the chants rose once more. The drums returned, shaking the walls of the temple. The priests prepared the sacred altar, placing crystals around it that pulsed with dull light. They believed the gods were listening. They believed the sacrifice would save them. Nira closed her eyes. She was tired of being called cursed. Tired of chains that bound not only her body but her spirit. She was ready for whatever end awaited her. Yet, in the silence between the drums, she thought of the streak of light in the sky and the figure who had stepped from the smoke. For the first time in her life, she wondered if fate had sent someone not to end her story but to begin it. The village of stone huts glowed under the torchlight. Songs and chants filled the air as people prepared for the sacred night. Every path led toward the temple on the hill, where the offering would be made. To them, this was not a cruel act. It was survival, a promise to the gods that their crops would grow, their children would live, and their storms would pass. No one dared to question the tradition. But among the crowd stood the outsider, the man who had fallen from the sky. His name was Rin. He listened to the chants with a heavy heart, his eyes drifting again and again toward the temple gates. He could not stop thinking of the whispers he had heard, of the girl who waited inside. He had seen suffering in many forms across the stars, but the thought of a life offered in silence troubled him more deeply than he wished to admit. The villagers watched him carefully. They had offered him food and a place to rest, yet their eyes held suspicion. Some saw him as a gift from the gods. Others saw him as a danger. To Rin, their kindness was thin, held together only by fear of angering whatever higher power they worshipped. He tried to be respectful, but his thoughts kept returning to the temple. At the heart of the village, an elder stood before the people. His voice was strong despite his age. He reminded them that the hour was near, that their ancestors had always given when the gods demanded. The people cheered and raised their hands toward the temple. The elder spoke of the untamable girl, a spirit too wild to live among them, chosen for sacrifice since birth. The crowd nodded in agreement, for they had been told this story so many times that it had become truth in their hearts. Rin lowered his head, but his mind argued with every word. He thought of the long journeys he had made, the many worlds he had walked, and the many voices he had heard. Always there were those who suffered in silence, treated as less than human, less than alive. Here, the same story was told in a different tongue. And he wondered what kind of gods asked for such an offering. Far above in the temple chamber, Nira sat as she always had, her wrists bound by chains of crystal. She could hear the chants carried up from the village below. She knew each sound by heart, for they had filled her ears every year of her life. The difference now was the sense that someone new had come. She had not seen him, but she felt his presence. A stranger who did not belong to her people, yet whose steps echoed in her mind. The door to the temple opened, and two priests entered with bowls of glowing oil. They placed the bowls around her, marking the floor with symbols. They did not look her in the eyes. No priest ever did. They treated her as an object, not as a soul. But Nero watched them, silent as always, her silver eyes calm. She gave them no satisfaction of fear. Down in the village, Ren was restless. He could not sleep. The fire crackled near his shelter, yet the warmth gave him no peace. At last he rose and began to walk. The night air was cool, and the moonlight silvered the path. He moved through shadows, avoiding the gaze of the guards near the temple. His steps were quiet, guided by the weight in his chest. He reached the base of the hill and looked up at the towering temple. Its carvings glowed faintly, catching the light of the torches. The stone faces of ancient gods stared down at him, their expressions carved in power and judgment. Ren felt a chill, but he did not turn away. Something inside him told him he must see the truth with his own eyes. Two guards stood near the gate. Their spears gleamed with crystal tips, and their eyes were sharp. Ren did not approach openly. Instead, he circled the hill, searching for another way. Vines covered one side of the stone wall, reaching high. He tested them with his hands, and though they strained, they held. Slowly, carefully, he climbed. When he reached the top, he crouched low, breathing steady. The courtyard was empty except for torches burning in a line toward the temple door. The silence here was heavier than below, broken only by the faint sound of drums. Ren crossed the courtyard with caution, his eyes always moving, his ears alert. The great doors of the temple loomed before him. They were carved with swirling patterns that seemed to move in the torchlight. He touched the stone, and it felt warm, as though alive. With a slow push, he opened the door just enough to slip inside. The chamber smelled of oil and burning crystal. The air was thick and heavy. Ren's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and then he saw her. The girl sat on the floor at the center of the chamber, chains of glowing crystal binding her wrists. Her hair fell across her shoulders, pale in the light of the torches. Her silver eyes turned toward him the moment he entered. They did not widen in fear, nor narrow in anger. They simply met his, calm and steady, as though she had been waiting for him. Ren froze. He had expected many things. A frightened child. A wild creature. A broken prisoner. But not this. Not the silent strength in her gaze. He stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. The chains shimmered, and he could feel their energy even from where he stood. The girl did not move, but she tilted her head slightly, studying him as if trying to decide whether he was real. Ren whispered, though he was not sure why. "You are the one they call the offering." The girl did not speak. She lifted her hand slowly, showing the chains. Her fingers touched the crystal, then tapped it once, lightly, as though pointing to it. Her eyes never left his. Ren felt his breath catch. He reached out, almost against his will, and laid his hand upon the chain. The crystal flared at his touch, a pulse of light running through it. For a moment he thought it would burn him, but instead the glow softened, and the chain grew weaker, its sharp hum fading. The girl's lips parted for the first time. Her voice was soft, a single word carried like a secret. "Free." Ren pulled back, stunned. He looked at her, then at the chain, then back again. The word hung in the air like a promise. In that instant, he understood. This was no curse. No wild spirit. No offering to forgotten gods. She was alive, and she was waiting for someone to see her. Someone who would not turn away. The night of the offering came with fire and music. The village square blazed with torches, and the air was thick with smoke from the great bonfires. Drums pounded in steady rhythm, and the people moved as one, their chants echoing into the hills. The ceremony was not only an act of faith but also a celebration, a gathering of every family and every child. To them, the offering was not sorrow. It was duty. Rin stood among the crowd, his hood drawn low, trying not to draw attention. Yet his eyes kept drifting upward, toward the temple. He had not spoken of what he had seen. He kept the memory of the girl and her single word locked in his heart. It weighed on him with every beat of the drum. The villagers danced and clapped, their faces filled with joy, but all Rin could see was the girl sitting alone behind stone walls. The elder raised his staff, and the square fell silent. His voice rang out clear and commanding. He spoke of the gods who watched from the stars, of the storms they had endured in years past, and of the blessings they would gain through obedience. He told the people that the untamable one would be offered before dawn, and that her life would seal their safety for another year. The crowd answered with cheers. Children clapped their hands. Mothers held their infants close. Farmers lifted their arms to the sky, thanking powers they could not see. Rin felt a chill as he watched. These were not cruel people, yet they accepted cruelty as tradition. Their belief blinded them to the truth that the girl was no curse, no danger. She was simply different, and for that they had chosen her fate. Inside the temple, Nira heard the chants rise. The sound of drums reached her chamber, shaking the floor beneath her. She lifted her head and listened. She had heard this same music since she was a child. It always came with the same meaning. She had been told since her earliest memory that she was the chosen one, the untamable one who must be given to the gods. Yet she had never agreed to the story. Her silence was her only refusal, her only way of holding power against those who bound her. She closed her eyes and thought of the stranger who had entered her chamber the night before. His touch had weakened the chain, something no one else had ever done. For the first time in her life, she had spoken a word. A single word that carried all her longing. She wondered if he would return, or if he would leave her to the fate chosen by others. As the night deepened, the priests gathered at the temple gate. They wore long robes of crimson and gold, their heads covered with tall headdresses of crystal. Each carried a staff tipped with glowing stone. They marched down to the village square, greeted with cheers from the people. The elder met them and raised his staff once more. "The hour comes," he declared. "Prepare the altar." The villagers moved in unison, carrying baskets of grain, jars of water, and tokens of wood and clay. They placed these around the square, small gifts to join with the greater offering. The fires blazed higher, sparks rising into the night sky. The drums slowed to a steady beat, each strike heavy and deliberate, like the pounding of a great heart. Ren stood at the edge of the crowd, his fists clenched at his sides. His mind raced with questions. Could he save the girl without bringing ruin upon himself? Could he even break the chains fully? He remembered the way the crystal had weakened at his touch, the way her eyes had looked into his without fear. He knew he could not stand aside. Yet he also knew the danger of defying a whole village bound by belief. He slipped away from the square, moving into the shadows of the path that climbed toward the temple. The guards at the base of the hill were distracted by the ceremony below, their eyes fixed on the fires and their ears filled with the rhythm of drums. Ren moved silently past them, his steps quick and careful. The temple loomed above, its torches burning brighter than ever. The stone faces carved into its walls seemed alive in the firelight, their expressions stern and unyielding. Ren felt their gaze upon him, but he pressed on. He pushed open the heavy doors and entered the chamber once more. Nero lifted her head as he stepped inside. Her silver eyes met his, and for the first time in her life she allowed a spark of hope to show. He moved closer, his hand reaching for the chain again. The crystal shimmered, humming with energy. He pressed his palm against it, and once again it grew weak, its glow fading. The chain cracked but did not break. Ren frowned, pressing harder. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the energy resisted him. Nira raised her hands higher, guiding him, urging him not to give up. Her silence was no longer empty. It was filled with faith. Finally, with a sound like shattering glass, one of the links broke apart and fell to the floor. The hum of the chain faded from her wrist, leaving her free on one side. Nira gasped softly, her first true sound beyond the words she had spoken. She touched her wrist, marveling at the absence of weight. But the noise had not gone unheard. Outside the chamber, footsteps echoed. The priests were returning. Ren looked to the door, then back at Nira. He whispered quickly, "We must move." Nira nodded, her eyes steady. For the first time, she rose to her feet without chains pulling her down. She stood taller than he expected, her presence calm yet powerful. She moved beside him, ready to follow wherever he would lead. The heavy doors creaked as voices grew closer. The priests chanted, unaware of what they were about to find. Ren's heart pounded as he searched for a way out. Nira reached for his hand, and when her fingers touched his, the remaining chain on her other wrist glowed brighter, reacting to the bond. It was then Ren realized the truth. The chains were not simply locks of crystal. They were bonds tied to her spirit, bonds that only his touch could weaken. He looked at her, and she gave the smallest nod, as though she understood too. The priests' voices echoed at the threshold. Ren tightened his grip on her hand. The night of the offering was far from over, but the meaning of the ritual had already begun to change. The temple doors trembled as the priests drew near. Their chants grew louder, their staffs glowing with the pale light of crystal. Inside the chamber, Ren held his breath, his hands still locked with Nira's. Her chain glowed faintly as though awakened by their bond. One wrist was free, but the other still bound her. The sound of footsteps pressed closer. Ren looked around quickly. There was no time to break the second chain. He saw a narrow passage behind the altar, a shadowed archway carved into the stone. He pulled Nira gently toward it. She moved without hesitation, her eyes steady, her steps light. Together they slipped into the passage just as the heavy doors opened wide. The priests entered, their robes sweeping across the floor, their voices still chanting. They walked to the center of the chamber, expecting to find the silent offering kneeling in her chains. Instead, they found only broken crystal lying on the floor. The leading priest bent down, his fingers brushing the fragments. His face hardened. "She has been touched," he said. "Someone has defiled the bond." The others gasped. Their chants broke into whispers of fear. They looked toward the doors, then toward the empty altar. One priest raised his staff higher. "The gods will be angered. We must find her before the hour passes." In the shadows of the hidden passage, Ren and Nero listened. The narrow hall led downward, its walls damp and carved long ago. The air smelled of earth and dust. Ren guided her carefully, his voice low. We must stay quiet. They will search. Nira nodded. Her silver eyes reflected the faint glow of the torches behind them. She touched her freed wrist again, as though reminding herself that the weight was truly gone. The chain on her other arm still pulsed with light, but weaker now. She looked at Rin's hand, the one that had shattered the first bond, and then she whispered for the second time. Human. Rin stopped, surprised to hear her voice again. It was soft, but clear. He gave a small nod. Yes. That is what I am. She tilted her head, studying him. The word seemed strange on her tongue, yet she spoke it with a quiet respect. Then she raised her bound wrist toward him. The crystal glowed faintly, waiting. Rin pressed his palm against it, but this time the bond resisted. The glow flared, brighter than before. He gritted his teeth, focusing. Nira closed her eyes, as though lending her strength. Slowly, the hum of the crystal softened. Cracks formed along the surface, thin at first, then spreading. Finally, the chain shattered into fragments, falling silently to the floor of the passage. Nira's arms were free. She breathed deeply, her shoulders rising and falling, as if tasting freedom for the first time. Her eyes shone with emotion she had hidden for years. She whispered again, her voice trembling with wonder. Free. Rin almost smiled. He had traveled across stars, seen countless worlds, but never had a single word carried such weight. They moved further down the passage until it opened into a small chamber, hidden from the temple above. Here, the air was cool, and a faint stream of water trickled through the rocks. Nira sat upon the stone floor, her hands resting on her knees. She looked at Rin as though waiting for him to explain who he was and why he had come. Rin sat across from her, his back against the wall. He spoke quietly, telling her of his ship, of the fire in the sky, of his fall into her world. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. Though she said little, her silence was no longer cold. It was filled with curiosity, with the weight of questions unspoken. At last, she asked, "Why help me?" Rin looked at her, searching for the right words. "Because you are alive. Because no one deserves to be given away like this." Her silver eyes softened. She lowered her head for a moment, then raised it again. "They fear me. Since birth, they fear me." "I saw no curse," Rin said firmly. "Only chains. And chains can be broken." Nira considered this. Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but something close. It was the first sign of warmth she had shown in years. Above them, the temple shook with movement. The priests had begun their search. Voices echoed through the halls, calling her name, demanding obedience to the gods. The drums outside grew faster, as if time itself was racing toward the altar. Rin rose to his feet. "We cannot stay here. They will find us." Nira stood as well, her movements graceful despite years of chains. She placed her hand on the stone wall, feeling its age, its hidden paths. She seemed to know the temple better than the priests themselves. With a silent gesture, she led him toward another corridor, narrower and darker. The passage wound upward, twisting like the roots of an ancient tree. Rin followed close, his hand near his side where he kept a small tool from his ship. It was not a weapon, but it could cut or spark if needed. He hoped he would not use it. They reached a small opening that looked out onto the forest beyond the temple. Moonlight poured in, soft and silver. Nira stepped forward and inhaled deeply, the scent of trees filling her lungs. For the first time in her life, she stood unchained before the night sky. Her eyes shone with reflection of the stars, and her voice trembled with awe. Beautiful. Ren looked at her, then at the forest stretching far and wide. He knew danger waited behind them, but he also knew that this moment was theirs. She had been bound all her life, yet now she tasted freedom. Sudden shouts rose from below. The priests had discovered the hidden passages. Torches flickered in the distance, and the sound of feet grew louder. Ren turned to Nira. "We must go now." She nodded, her calm returning. Together they climbed out through the opening, stepping onto the stone ledge. Below lay the dark forest, its trees swaying gently in the wind. Without hesitation, Nero leapt down, landing softly on the grass. Ren followed, his heart racing. The forest welcomed them with shadows and silence. They ran between trees, their steps muffled by leaves. Behind them, the priests' torches flickered at the edge of the temple, searching, calling, demanding. But the forest swallowed their cries. At last, they stopped beside a river that shimmered in the moonlight. Nira knelt by the water, her fingers touching its surface. She looked at her reflection and saw herself without chains. For the first time, she saw not the cursed child, not the offering, but Nira, a girl free to choose her own path. Ren watched her quietly, giving her space. He knew their journey was only beginning. The villagers would not stop their search. The priests would not forgive the broken ritual. Yet in this moment, as the water rippled around her hands, he felt a certainty. He had unlocked more than her chains. He had unlocked her life. The forest whispered around them, alive with the hum of unseen creatures. The moon shone through the tall trees, casting silver light upon the ground. Ren and Nira stood by the river, the water glittering as it flowed past. Her hands still touched the surface, as though she could not believe it was real. For years her world had been stone walls and chains. Now she stood beneath the sky, free. Ren kept watch, his eyes scanning the shadows. The voices of the priests had faded behind them, but he knew they would not give up. To the villagers, Nira was more than a girl. She was their promise to the gods. Her escape would shake the roots of their belief. He turned back to her, his voice quiet. "They will search for us. We cannot stay here." Nero lifted her gaze. Her silver eyes reflected the moonlight, calm yet sharp. She stood slowly, her hands falling to her sides. "Where?" she asked softly. Ren pointed toward the mountains that rose in the distance. "If we reach the high ground, we can see farther. We can find a place they will not follow." Nira nodded once. Her steps were sure as she followed him into the trees. The path was rough, covered in roots and stones, yet she moved with grace. Ren noticed the way she listened to every sound, the way her head turned toward the calls of distant animals. She seemed connected to the forest in a way he was not. He had traveled many worlds, but here he felt like a stranger. She, though bound for so long, belonged to this land. As they walked, Ren spoke, breaking the silence. "Those chains. They were not like anything I have seen before. When I touched them, they grew weaker. Why?" Nira's eyes lowered. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Only a human could break them." Ren frowned. "How do you know this?" She placed her hand over her chest. "I feel it. Since I was a child. The chains were made to hold my spirit. My people feared me. They thought the gods marked me. But in my heart I always knew, only a hand from beyond could free me." Ren walked in silence for a while, her words heavy in his mind. He thought of the crash that had brought him here, the fire in the sky that had led him to this place. Perhaps it had not been an accident after all. The forest thickened as they moved uphill. Branches tangled above them, blocking much of the moonlight. Ren lit a small torch from his pack, its flame casting a gentle glow. Nero watched it with wonder. Fire had always been part of the ceremonies, controlled by the priests. To see it carried in the hand of someone who did not fear it was strange to her. They reached a clearing where the trees bent back, revealing the stars. Nero stopped and looked upward. Her eyes widened as she gazed at the endless sky. She had always seen pieces of it from her chamber, but never the whole. The stars spread like a sea of light, each one a world beyond her reach. She whispered the word again, filled with awe. Beautiful. Ren followed her gaze. For him, the stars were a map, familiar and endless. For her, they were freedom. He said softly, "One day I will return to them. Maybe you can come with me." Her eyes shifted to him, studying his face. She did not answer, but the faint curve of her lips told him she was imagining it. A rustle in the distance broke the moment. Ren lowered his torch and listened. Nira turned her head sharply, her senses keen. From the shadows came the faint glow of torches. Voices carried through the night. The priests had followed their trail. Ren quickly put out the flame. Darkness wrapped around them, broken only by the light of the moon. He grabbed Nira's hand, pulling her toward the far side of the clearing. She ran beside him, her steps silent, her breath steady. The bond between them was no longer chains but choice. They moved deeper into the forest, weaving between thick trunks and low branches. The voices of the priests grew louder behind them, the light of their torches flickering in pursuit. Ren's heart pounded, but Nira did not slow. Her eyes seemed to guide her through the darkness, as if the land itself showed her the way. At last they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. The land stretched far below, dotted with rivers and hills. The air was cool and sharp. Ren and Nira paused, catching their breath. From this height they could see the flicker of torches far behind, still climbing. Nira stepped forward, her silver eyes scanning the valley. She lifted her hand and pointed toward a cluster of glowing trees in the distance. Their branches shimmered with natural light, soft and steady. "Safe," she said quietly. Ren trusted her instinct. They began the descent into the valley, careful with each step. The glowing trees grew closer, their light guiding them. When they reached them, Ren realized the glow came not from fire but from the trees themselves. Their bark shimmered with veins of crystal, and their leaves glowed faintly, casting gentle radiance across the ground. Nira touched one of the trees with reverence. Her voice was soft, filled with memory. The old ones spoke of this place. A sanctuary? Few believe it is real. Ren felt a strange calm as he looked around. The air here was still, untouched by the drums and chants of the village. It was as if the forest itself protected this place. They rested beneath the trees, their light bathing them in warmth. Nira sat close to the trunk, her hand still pressed against it. She looked at Ren, her silver eyes steady. "You came from the stars," she said. "You freed me. But more will come. The priests will not stop." Ren nodded. "Then we will stay ahead of them. I will not let them take you back." Her gaze softened. She lowered her eyes, then whispered, "Why? You could leave me. You owe me nothing." Ren leaned back against the glowing tree. His voice was steady. Because you are more than what they call you. I see it. And because sometimes fate brings us where we are needed most. Silence settled between them, but it was not empty. It was filled with trust slowly forming, like roots growing deep into the earth. Above them, the stars shone brighter, and in the distance the drums of the village faded. For the first time, Nero felt not like an offering, not like a curse, but like a person with a choice. And sitting beside her, Ren felt the bond that had begun in chains grow into something greater, something unspoken yet strong. The night stretched long, but neither feared it. Together they faced the unknown, and together they stepped into the first chapter of freedom. The glow of the crystal trees faded behind them as Nira and Ren moved further into the forest. The terrain became rougher, the ground uneven with roots and stones. Mist hovered close to the earth, curling around the trees like a living thing. Every step required care, yet Nira moved as if she had always belonged to this place. Ren struggled to keep up, his legs tiring, but he could not let her fall behind. From the ridge where they had rested, the priests had seen their escape. Shouts rose into the night, calling the girl's name. The villagers ran behind them, some holding torches, others carrying rods of crystal. To them, Nira was not just a girl. She was their duty, their sacred promise to the gods. To let her go would invite misfortune, or so they believed. Nira's silver eyes scanned the shadows. Her hands brushed over tree bark, guiding them through hidden paths. Ren noticed the skill in her movements, the quiet confidence that came from years of survival. She had lived under chains and yet had learned every secret the forest held. With her leading, they moved quickly and silently. The priests' voices grew louder, but Nira did not falter. "This way," she whispered, pointing toward a narrow canyon. The walls rose high on both sides, hiding them from view. The mist thickened, curling around their feet, muffling the sounds of pursuit. Ren nodded and followed, keeping his hand near the pack on his back. He knew the villagers would not stop. They would come with determination and numbers. But he also knew something about Nira that the priests could not see. She was not afraid, and with him beside her, she could move faster than any force could catch. As they reached the canyon, the shadows deepened. The narrow path twisted between stone walls covered in moss. Tiny streams trickled from cracks, forming small pools that reflected the moonlight. Nira paused at one, crouching to touch the water. She inhaled deeply, the air crisp and cool. "Safe for now," she said softly. Her voice carried no fear, only calm. Ren knelt beside her, checking the sky above the canyon walls. Stars peeked through gaps in the clouds, and the moonlight gave them some guidance. He looked at Nira. "They will not stop." "I know," she replied. "But neither will we." They continued along the path, moving quickly yet carefully. The priests' torches flickered in the distance, and occasional shouts echoed through the canyon. Ren felt his heart beat faster, but Nira's presence steadied him. She was more than a girl, she was a guide, a protector of this land in ways he had yet to understand. After some time, the canyon opened to a clearing. The mist lifted slightly, revealing a wide field dotted with flowers that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The air smelled sweet and fresh. Nira stepped forward, her hands brushing over the petals, feeling their energy. Ren watched, amazed at her connection to the living world around her. "We can rest here," she said. "They will not follow." Ren nodded. They settled in the clearing, leaning against the soft grass. Nira closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of flowers and earth. "They never understood me," she whispered. They feared what they could not control. Fear is easy, Ren said quietly. It is harder to understand, to care. You have survived because you are stronger than they know. Her eyes opened, silver in the moonlight. Stronger, yes. But alone, strength is not enough. That is why you are here. Ren looked at her, surprised. Why me? She smiled faintly, the first real smile he had seen. Because you do not fear what they fear. You see me. The wind shifted in the clearing, carrying the faint scent of smoke. Ren stiffened. They are close, he said. We cannot linger. Nira rose gracefully, brushing her hands over her robes. We must go higher. The mountains. We can see them coming and move before they reach us. Together they began the climb toward the foothills. The path grew steeper, jagged rocks jutting from the ground. Nira moved effortlessly, her body light and sure. Ren struggled but kept pace, inspired by her determination. As they climbed, the priest's shouts grew fainter, swallowed by distance and mist. Yet Ren knew they were not safe. The villagers would never give up easily. Hours passed, the moon traveling across the sky. When they reached a high ridge, the world spread out before them. Valleys and rivers glimmered in the pale light. Nero looked down at the village, tiny now, the temple lights faint. They cannot see us here, she said. But they will try. Ren nodded. Then we move again before dawn. They rested briefly, drinking from a small stream that trickled from the rocks. Nira touched the water, feeling its flow, its life. She smiled faintly, and Ren realized how much this moment meant to her. Chains had never allowed her to connect with the world. Now she drank it in freely, absorbing the simple life around her. You are unlike anyone I have ever met, Ren said. Nira tilted her head. And you are unlike anyone I have ever known. That is why we are here, together. Ren looked at her, feeling the weight of those words. They had fled from a world that would not accept her, yet in each other, they had found an ally, a friend, someone who understood without needing explanation. The stars began to fade as the first light of dawn crept over the mountains. The forest below was quiet, the village invisible now from their height. Nira stood tall, her silver eyes reflecting the sunrise. We have a chance, she said. A chance to live differently. To be more than they think we are. Ren smiled faintly. Then we take it? For the first time since he had arrived, he felt that the journey had a purpose beyond survival. He had found someone who needed him, someone who had unlocked a part of his own heart he had kept hidden. And Nira, for the first time in her life, had found freedom and a companion who would not leave her side. Together, they began to move along the ridge, the mountains stretching ahead like a promise. The forest behind them faded into memory. The priests and villagers would come, but the bond between them had already changed everything. They were no longer hunter and hunted. They were two people choosing a path together. The wind carried their steps forward. The sun rose higher, scattering mist and shadows. Ren and Nira walked side by side, stepping into the unknown future, ready for whatever challenges awaited. And in that moment, each felt that the world had shifted in their favor. The mountains stretched before them, bathed in the first light of dawn. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and stone. Ren and Nira moved slowly along a narrow path, each step measured but steady. The village below had disappeared from view, and with it, the fear that had filled Nira's life for so long. Nira stopped on a flat stone that overlooked the valley below. The sun broke over the horizon, spilling gold and pink across the land. She breathed deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs. Her silver eyes reflected the light, bright and calm. For the first time in her life, she did not feel bound by chains, traditions, or fear. She was free. Ren watched her closely. He had walked with many beings across countless worlds, yet none had the quiet strength of Nira. She had endured what few could imagine, yet she had not lost her spirit. He knew their journey was far from over. The priests and villagers would not forgive what they considered the breaking of sacred law. But for now, in this moment, the world was theirs. "You are different from anyone I have ever met," Ren said quietly. Nira turned to him, a small smile curving her lips. "And you are different from anyone I have ever known. That is why we are together." They stood side by side, looking down at the forest below. The river sparkled in the sunlight, winding through valleys like silver ribbon. Birds flew across the sky, their calls clear and free. Nira's heart felt lighter than it ever had, as though the weight of years had finally lifted. "Where will we go?" Ren asked. Nira paused, thinking. "There is a land beyond these mountains. Few have traveled there. It is said to be untouched, a place where one can live without fear of chains or sacrifice." Ren nodded. "Then we go there. Together." The path down the mountains was steep, yet Nero led the way with confidence. Ren followed closely, keeping an eye on her. The bond between them had grown deeper than words. It was not just trust. It was understanding. They moved as if they were connected, each aware of the other's presence and thoughts without needing to speak. As they descended, Nira spoke softly. "I have seen many things, even while chained. I have seen fear, cruelty, and ignorance. But I have also seen hope, small sparks of life that refuse to die. You are one of those sparks." Ren looked at her, surprised by the depth of her words. "I do not feel like a spark. I am only a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "You do more than that," Nira said. "You gave me freedom. That is more than anyone has ever done. That is a gift I will not forget." They reached the edge of a small forest clearing, where the sun touched the ground with warmth. Nira knelt for a moment, touching the soil with her hands. She closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of the land, feeling its pulse. She rose, her face serene. "Freedom is more than escaping chains," she said. "It is knowing that you can choose. I choose life. I choose hope. I choose to walk forward without fear." Ren felt a warmth in his chest. He had traveled through storms and darkness, fought battles on distant worlds, yet he had never felt the clarity of purpose he felt now. With Nero beside him, he understood that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about protecting what is precious, about walking into the unknown with courage. They continued through the forest, the trees parting to reveal a small river. Nira knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink. The water was clear and sweet. Ren joined her, and they drank together. For a moment, they simply sat, listening to the gentle flow of the river and the calls of birds in the trees. "We cannot stay here forever," Ren said after a while. Nira nodded. "The priests will continue their search. They will not understand that I am not theirs to control. We must keep moving." Ren looked at her, determination in his eyes. "Then we will go as far as we must. I will not let them take you back. Not ever." Nira smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and relief in her eyes. "You do not have to say it. I know it. That is enough." The sun climbed higher, warming the earth. Nira and Ren moved along the river, leaving the mountains behind. The world stretched before them, vast and full of possibilities. Nira's steps were light, filled with the excitement of someone who had finally claimed her life. Rin felt the same thrill, not just of escape, but of discovery. Hours later, they reached the edge of the forest. A new land spread before them, rolling hills and distant mountains touched by sunlight. It was a place untouched by chains or fear. Nira paused, looking at the horizon. "This is where we begin," she said softly. Rin nodded. "Then we begin." Together they walked into the new land, leaving behind the past and all its burdens. The priests and villagers would search, but their fear and ignorance could not follow into this untouched place. Here, they would shape their own future, free from the chains of tradition. As they moved forward, Nira spoke again, her voice filled with hope. "I will not forget what has been done to me. But I will not let it define me. I am more than chains. I am more than fear. I am Nira." Rin smiled. "And I will stand by you, Nira. Whatever comes, we face it together." The sun rose fully, bathing the land in golden light. Nira lifted her head, her silver eyes reflecting the dawn. She felt the wind on her face, smelled the flowers and the river, and heard the songs of birds. Life was vast, unpredictable, and beautiful. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free. And beside her, Ren felt the same. He had crossed the stars, faced dangers he could not name, and yet nothing had prepared him for this moment. Nothing had ever felt more right than walking forward into the unknown, with Nira by his side. The mountains and the forest fell behind them. The new land stretched ahead, waiting for them to explore, to live, and to grow. They had escaped the chains of tradition, the fear of the gods, and the weight of the past. What lay ahead was unknown, but it was theirs to shape. Together, hand in hand, they stepped into the sunlight. The world was vast, the future open, and their journey had only just begun. Nira was no longer the untamable girl of the temple. She was a symbol of hope, freedom, and choice. And with Rin at her side, she would never walk alone again.